welcome everybody. This is Beth or Elizabeth. You go by Elizabeth, but I know you go by Beth as well.
Yes.
This is the Alum Rock foothills. And so I know some of your stories are about places on the east side in the Alum Rock. So I know a lot of people are interested in those stories, particularly Alum Rock and Overfelt and Independence and some of those. So I know people are still going to be jumping in, but we're just going to go ahead and start. And if you guys have any questions, you could pop it in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Just type it in there and we'll try to address it. We'll have a Q&A section at the end. So we're going to chat with Beth for a little bit, and then she's going to do a presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions or share additional stories about some of the places around here. So, Beth, I want to highlight your no, maybe not. I don't know how to spotlight your thing, but it usually works, but it's not working right now. Okay. But anyways, Beth, so I understand that you grew up in San Jose. So where did you grow up at?
So I grew up in the Thousand Oaks neighborhood, which is kind of between Willow Glen and Almaden. So it's kind of like South Central San Jose. My parents still live there. They're in the same house that they've been in for almost 50 years. So South San Jose and kind of West San Jose is really my stomping grounds. I don't actually know a whole lot about the Alum Rock area, so it was pretty cool to do the research and to visit places out there when I was writing the book.
Yeah, we're a very, very old neighborhood up here, which is, because of Alum Rock Park, and of course the First Country Club was here, so we have a lot of history on this side of the town. Have you written other books before?
No, this is my first, my only, probably my last. maybe not.
So how did you get this gig then to write the book?
So I've always loved reading books of ghost stories, and I've always wished that San Jose had a good ghost story book. I wanted to read something that was well written and well researched, and there just hasn't been anything like that. And so I've thought for years, somebody should write a book about San Jose. And then finally I thought, oh, I guess I could do it. And so I've been taking notes on ghost stories for years. And then during the pandemic, the shutdown, when everybody was working from home, I had some time, so I just wrote it myself.
That's great. So you don't have a background as a writer or teacher? Or?
Well, I am an English teacher. I'm a high school English teacher.
Helpful.
Yes, it's been very helpful. So yeah, I do have an English literature background, and I've always enjoyed writing, but I've never done it professionally. So this is my first experience with that.
Oh, great. So as people are coming in, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Okay. So how did you pitch the story? Because Arcadia is the one that published it, correct?
Yeah. So Arcadia makes it really easy, actually. They actually have a button on their website. It says, "Make me an author," and you fill out a form with your area of interest, and then an editor will, if they like what you've suggested, an editor will contact you. But from there, I still had to go through the book proposal process, which was actually one of the more difficult parts of the whole thing. A book proposal, in this case, it was like 11 pages. I had to outline the whole thing. I had to talk about what retailers might be interested. So I really had to prove that there was kind of a need for this and that there would be an interest. And fortunately, there has been an interest in this.
People love haunted stories. They love ghost stories.
Yes.
So, well, that's cool. So what school do you teach at?
I teach at Branham High School in San Jose.
Oh, okay. You guys have really good programs there, actually.
We do. Yes. Yeah. I really enjoy working there. Yeah.
Okay. So that is cool. So I'm going to go ahead and let you do your presentation.
Okay.
It's most of the people, not everybody, but we have a good group of people in already. So go ahead and do your thing.
Sounds good. So thank you for having me. First of all, it's pretty exciting to get to talk to people about this thing that I've created. My contact information is on the first slide. It's also on the last slide. So if you have any questions for me that I don't address, or if you're just interested in more information about the book, you can always get a hold of me. So just on the agenda for tonight, I'll talk just a tiny bit more about myself, a little bit about the book. I'm going to have a 2-minute history of San Jose, and then a super quick history of Alum Rock, the area. And then I'm going to cover my top 4 haunted places in Alum Rock and the foothills. So yeah, let's get into it. So as Darlene said, I am a lifelong resident of San Jose. I went to Pioneer High School and I attended San Jose State, and there are ghost stories associated with State. I'm a 7th generation Californian, so my family has been in California for a long, long time. I'm a descendant of some of the families that got the land grants from the Mexican government. And also I just learned recently that there's actually a Zapata adobe, a historic adobe that they found the foundations of downtown. My mother is a Zapata, so there's like direct family history there, which is pretty exciting. I teach at Branham. I am a certified paranormal investigator, and I've done investigations primarily in the Virginia City and Truckee area, but I've investigated places all over the country. I'm kind of informally in San Jose. I have not investigated every place that I wrote about in the book, but I would like to. So I'm pitching the book as the preeminent historical account of hauntings in San Jose. I cover 36 locations within city limits, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And I talk not only about the ghost stories, but also about the histories. So I like to tell my students that literature does not exist in a vacuum. Literature overlaps with history, with sociology, with everything. So I've really tried to show the context of a place and then talk about the ghost stories behind it. So speaking of the boundary, San Jose is a huge place. And because I had a maximum word count, I really had to limit myself to the locations I could write about. And actually, I did not cover the El Viso area. So that might be my second book, maybe, Haunted, Not San Jose. So like the Sunnyvale Toys R Us, the one that everybody knows in this area. Unfortunately, that didn't make it into my book because it's not within the city limits. But, you know, I tried to cover a good variety from the city. And actually, Alum Rock is one of the areas that I'm not really familiar with at all. So like I said, it was pretty cool to learn about the history and to take a drive out there and just poke around.
You could see a beautiful Alum Rock Park.
I went there for the first time just about a year ago, and I can't believe I've been in San Jose for 40 years and I had never been there. It was incredible. So, and I will be talking about Alum Rock Park in a moment. So a quick history of San Jose. Obviously, it's too long to go into much depth here. And of course, it's been covered in other places, but we do know that the Ohlone were the original inhabitants. And I did talk about some of their legends in my book as well. The Pueblo of San Jose was founded in 1777 by Spanish colonists to support the nearby missions. And San Jose was California's first civilian settlement, which I think is pretty cool. And during Mexican occupation, beginning in 1821, the missions were dissolved. And that's when we start to see the land grants, which begin to shape the development of kind of the neighborhoods of San Jose. Mexican rule ended in 1846. And 4 years later, San Jose was briefly named the first capital of California. I think that lasted maybe 10 months or so. And we will see that in a story later tonight. San Jose was known as the agricultural capital when we were the center of the Valley of Heart's Delight. And of course, now we know it as a center for invention and innovation. We are now Silicon Valley, and we continue to be the 10th largest city in the United States with a population of just over 1 million. So obviously I'm not an expert on Alum Rock, but just a little quick background of the neighborhood, not the park, but the neighborhood. It was formed as its own town. It was independent of San Jose, and I understand that some portions are still unincorporated. In the late 1800s to the early 1900s, the area was primarily fruit orchards, and development started in the 1940s and the 50s. Alum Rock Avenue, as we'll see, was a major thoroughfare on the way to Alum Rock Park, which is one of the more iconic features of the entire city of San Jose. And just to note, the Wikipedia page for this area says that the passenger rail continued to carry visitors to Alum Rock Park into the 1950s, I think, but that's inaccurate. So the rail closed down in 1932, just as a little aside. I'll be talking about the railway as well. And I did write about the ghost at Overfelt High School in my book, although I won't be talking about that story tonight. And also Calvary Cemetery is said to be haunted, although I could not get enough documentation or enough personal stories about that location to include it in the book. But if you have something to share from anywhere else in the area that I did not cover, I would love to hear about it. Right. So the locations I will be talking about, we're going to start with Alum Rock Park, and then we're going to go up into the foothills. So not Alum Rock proper, but we will cover that part of the city, the Grandview Restaurant, Quimby Road, and Independence High School. All right. So we'll start with Alum Rock Park. So just a quick history of it, because as I said, my book really does blend the history and the ghost stories. So I love to give some context about what the location is about. Alum Rock Park is a 720-acre city park. It was created in 1872 as the city's first municipal park. And when it first became property of the city, it was referred to as the Reservation or Penitencia Reservation after nearby Penitencia Creek. And incidentally, I think the story of the creek is pretty interesting too. It was so called because it was thought to be where monks from the nearby missions would go to pray for penance and to hear each other's confessions. So that's how it got its name. Within the park, a white mineral found on the rocks was initially thought to be alum, which gave the park and the canyon within it its name. And later it was found that the mineral was actually a mixture of sulfur, gypsum, thenardite, and some other minerals. But fortunately, the name Alum Rock Park stuck. It's not nearly as easy to say some of those other names. So misnamed, but still a good name. The land within the park was characterized by its hot springs, which are the result of dormant volcanic activity under the surface even today. So the hot springs drew people for their purported healing powers. It was marketed as a health spa. And so there was a bathhouse that was one of the first structures in the park. And from there, the commercial and the tourist opportunities were capitalized upon, and the park grew to include railroad lines, a hotel, a zoo, an indoor swimming pool, picnic grounds, miles of hiking trails, and other features of development. And the park attracted so many visitors, by some counts, it received 10,000 visitors on Sundays, that they eventually became its downfall. And the natural beauty of the canyon was spoiled and crowded, and people began turning away, except for, it's rumored, unsavory characters who conducted nefarious activity in the park, which I think gave it its reputation initially as kind of a scary place. So eventually most structures in the park were removed and it was returned to its more natural state as it remains today. And I know there are some people who are kind of upset about the loss of some of these attractions. And it certainly would be cool to see the 2-story water slide at the natatorium, but I also think it's a wonderful thing to have this bit of unspoiled and undeveloped land in the heart of our city. So the pictures on this slide, the gazebo is one example of what remains of the development from when it was the Hot Springs Resort. And there's also a period photo of the slide in the natatorium. And amazingly, there were no deaths reported from that water slide. So some more photos of the development and the hot springs where the water continues to bubble up through the fissures in the rock. And then we'll talk about the paranormal stories. Okay. So one of them is about the devil's water. So the mineral that gave the water its healing powers also contributes to this story. The sulfur in the water gives it a distinct smell that for some people invokes fire and brimstone. And over the years, some more superstitious people claim that the park is the devil's playground and the water is his brew. And they claim that the devil himself is responsible for some of the misfortunes that have occurred in the park. The second story is probably the most famous one. It's actually a photo that appears on the back cover of my book. It's about the Alum Rock meteor. So in the early 20th century, park promoters highlighted a giant boulder near the Penitencia Creek entrance to the park. And they claimed that it weighed over 2,000 tons and that it was the remnant of a meteor that had fallen from space. And some old timers in the neighborhood even claimed that they could recall the night when this blazing meteorite fell out of the sky. But even at the time, scientists knew that it was not a meteorite, but that did not stop it from being a major attraction. And trains into the park would stop at this giant boulder so that people could marvel at the space rock. Unfortunately, in 1918, the rock was discovered to weigh only 389 tons and to be made of manganese, which is decidedly from Earth. It is not a space element. The meteor was mined for its ore during World War I, so it's no longer in existence. But despite that, people today still associate Alum Rock Park with extraterrestrial or alien activity, despite all scientific proof to the contrary. So there are some claims of alien activity that occurs in that area. There's many variations of the La Llorona story, but she is the weeping lady of Mexican folklore who was said to have drowned her children, and she is now doomed to wander eternity mourning for them. People have claimed to see her, and it's believed that the flowing waters of Penitencia Creek are said to fuel her because water is one natural conduit for spiritual manifestations. Finally, admittedly, this is kind of a problematic story, and strangely enough, it's one that occurs in other parts of San Jose. Alum Rock Park is not the only place in our city to have stories about cannibalistic albino cults. And in my book, I do address the demonizing and the vilifying of people with albinism. I do find these stories problematic, but it is one of the more well-known stories about the park, and it's part of our local folklore. So the story goes that there's a cult that lives in the hills. They center their activity around the log cabin that remains near the center of Alum Rock Park. And they come out at dusk to accost hikers and sometimes neighborhood dogs as well. And finally, the stories about albinos are tragic enough, but what's also tragic is that there has been a number of deaths in the park that have been verified. During its heyday in the early 1900s, there were 2 separate verified railway accidents that resulted in the deaths of at least 4 people. In one of them, a 15-year-old boy stuck his head out of the train window as it was passing through a tunnel, which means that he met a very gruesome end. And every couple of years to this day, another person meets their death at the park, whether from an accident or violence or by their own hand. And it's hard to tell if any of these deaths are responsible for specific sightings within the park, but they might be responsible for the feelings of unease that a lot of people report when they're in this area. Great. So our second location is, we're going up the hill a little bit, up the mountain, Grandview Restaurant. So the history of the Grandview, it began life in 1884 as a tavern, a hotel, and a stagecoach stop for workers who were building the observatory at the top of Mount Hamilton. So it's located on Mount Hamilton Road, about 5 miles up the hill from the Alum Rock neighborhood. And then later, after the observatory was complete, it catered to visitors and sightseers who were making that, at the time, treacherous trip up the narrow and windy mountain road. And just a quick word about the observatory. So James Lick was California's richest man in 1875, and he made his fortune in part by building pianos in South America, which is fascinating. And it was he who invited his friend Domingo Ghirardelli, a chocolate maker, to come check out this cool city on the coast called San Francisco. So we have James Lick to thank for, Ghirardelli Square and the observatory. He wanted to build a memorial to himself that would be remembered for generations after his death. And initially, his first idea was to build a giant pyramid in San Francisco. And then he considered some giant sculptures of himself and his parents in San Francisco that you could see from out on the ocean. But eventually, he became a little more practical and he decided on an observatory. And he chose as its site Mount Hamilton. He told the county board of supervisors that he would gift the finished observatory to the state if the county would build the road up to it, and that's today's Mount Hamilton Road. Lick died in 1876 and the observatory was finished in 1888. So he never got to see the finished product, but he is buried underneath the giant refractor telescope. And it's my understanding that he's the only person in the world to be buried underneath a telescope. So that's pretty cool. So after Mount Hamilton Road was completed to facilitate the building of the observatory, a local agriculturalist named Alonson Story, who already owned substantial property in San Jose, of course, Story Road is named for him, he purchased 1,500 acres of land on the side of Mount Hamilton, and he built the Grandview. And the original building burned down in 1945. It was rebuilt and then it burned again in 1954. And the restaurant that we can visit today is the third construction of the Grandview, and it's actually located across the street from the original location. So here we have a photo of the exterior of the building, and the view from the balcony overlooking the valley is far more scenic. A couple of photos here of the Lick Observatory with a statue of Lick on the left. And the paranormal stories. So the most prominent one, the primary story associated with the restaurant, is that of a young girl. She's said to be about 9 or 10. She appears on the balcony looking out at the view. And if anyone approaches her, she immediately disappears. So it's pretty difficult for people to agree on what she looks like or even get a good physical description of her. She's also thought to be the one who's responsible for activity in the kitchen and in the indoor dining rooms. And a lot of the activity that's reported involves cold spots, lights turning on and off, and the sound of voices and faint laughter from empty hallways. One legend attributes her death to a pretty horrific tale that's said to have happened in the foothills in the 1950s. I was unable to verify this, and family members and people I know who lived in San Jose in the 1950s had never heard of this story. But the legend says that during this decade, a number of children in the vicinity of the Grandview went missing and were never seen again. Possibly they were thought to be the victims of a serial kidnapper and killer, or maybe it was the work of a cult, as once again, we have rumors of a satanic albino cult that lives in the foothills. And as I said, documents don't support any children disappearing from the mountain at this time, but that doesn't change the stories of the little girl who appears on the balcony of the Grandview. And just another quick note on the Lick Observatory, it was outside the purview of my book, so I didn't include it, but there are a few stories that the observatory is also haunted. And specifically, some people have claimed to see a man who they believe is the ghost of James Lick roaming the buildings. And it is his final resting place after all, so we never know. Okay. So the third location is Quimby Road, which is also in the foothills, the vicinity. So quick history of this, San Jose proper has 3 roads that everyone seems to know for their ghosts. San Felipe Road, where handprints will appear on the outside of your car as you drive. And the other road is the infamous Hicks Road with its own sect of cannibal albinos. And then finally, Quimby Road is the 3rd most famous road in San Jose. It's also one of the scariest that I've driven, and I drove it during the day in a reliable car with no other traffic around, and it was still pretty frightening.
Scariest road. I was traumatized for 2 days, okay?
Yeah. And it's just from the twistiness, and then
I
right,
felt
it's
safe
not
when
even
I got to
looking.
Mount Hamilton Road.
Yeah.
That's how bad Quimby is.
Yeah, I agree. Quimby is not for the faint of heart and not for the inexperienced drivers. So, um, so Quimby also happens to be one of San Jose's oldest roads, which is maybe why it's so narrow and windy and twisty, and there are no guardrails in certain parts. But its name pays homage to a man who was instrumental in the early political days of San Jose. So John Alonzo Quimby was present at the first state legislature of California, held in San Jose from late 1849 to early 1850. And we're going to take a little detour here because this legislature also has its own ghost story. So when California was first becoming a state, 16 senators were given the task of creating the first state constitution and seating San Jose's state capital. And the members of the assembly were effective in these tasks, but they were also given the nickname the Legislature of 1,000 Drinks. Hard drinking Senator Thomas Jefferson Green apparently invited his colleagues after each section to, quote, have a drink, have 1,000 drinks, end quote. And some historians believe this is apocryphal. They don't believe it actually happened, but the nickname stuck, and it's immortalized on a plaque in downtown San Jose, which commemorates the site of the first capital of California. It's in the Circle of Palms on Market Street now. And late night visitors to this site claim to hear the sounds of ghostly partying and rousing cheers and glasses clinking as the long dead senators celebrate their successful legislating. And they're said to be especially active on cold December nights. So
Could be the
coming up.
Capitol Club that they're hearing.
Yeah, yes. Might be something to that, yes.
Yeah.
But you could also, go downtown and check it out. All right, so John Quimby was a member of this bunch, but he was not a drunkard like Green was said to be. By all accounts, Quimby was pretty sober and serious and successful. And then he later served as mayor of San Jose, and he also served on the county board of supervisors. And he was instrumental in strengthening the role of agriculture in San Jose and in also establishing public transit. So one of the forebears, the precursors to today's light rail system. Quimby's home away from his downtown home was a farm in the Evergreen area, which I know is like Alum Rock adjacent. So the road that bears his name went past his property. It was established in the 1860s or 70s, and it was used to reach Mount Hamilton Road. And today Quimby Road is completely developed from Eastridge until the foothills, when it gradually becomes more steep, more twisty, more rural, more terrifying. So the primary story here is the phantom jogger. So a ghostly jogger is said to run along this road at night. And if anyone comes across him, and it's always a him, I guess it could be a her, but people always claim that it's a he will veer off the road and disappear into the trees and the bushes along the shoulder. And in some versions, the jogger is missing his head, which witnesses don't notice until they're much closer to him. A pair of hikers on the Heron Trail, which is in Joseph D. Grant County Park at the very top of Quimby Road, witnessed the phantom jogger, but this version must have had its head because they said that when they came face to face with him, it felt like he was looking into their very souls, which was terrifying. And then he turned and vanished into the trees. What I think is really cool about this story, and really about a lot of the stories that I wrote about, is that there are parallel stories across the country. So a lot of the stories are not unique to San Jose. They include archetypes and tropes that appear across the country, and in some cases around the world, with specific elements that are just repeated in different places. And the phantom jogger is one of these archetypes. Who also, by the way, I understand there's a phantom jogger in the movie Ghostbusters, so that's kind of cool too. But just a couple other phantom joggers around the country that share similarities with ours. I was just in the Chicagoland area, and in Barrington, north of the city of Chicago, they have their own jogger that is seen on Cuba Road. Riverdale Road in Colorado is another famous one, but this time the ghost is a threat to people passing by, and he's said to attack cars that come looking for him. So fortunately, our Quimby Road is a little more shy. Canyon Hill in Idaho has a story that's a little bit different. And this time the phantom jogger is a woman. And it said that if you park your car between two certain trees, she will appear and knock on your window. And she is also said to have no legs, which I guess would make jogging pretty difficult. And so what I think is really interesting is just to think about the meaning behind this. And we know that so many legends and ghost stories are actually cautionary tales. And as a runner myself, I certainly understand the dangers of running in a rural, isolated, dimly lit or not lit at all road. So it might be a warning to take precaution, but there might be something else behind this story too. So I'll let you think about that for yourselves. And if you have any ideas about that one, be sure to let me know. And then finally, Independence High School. And I chose to include this one because it is, the largest school largest high school in San Jose, but also has a pretty compelling ghost story. So a little bit of history here. It's on Jackson Avenue. It's technically located in the Berryessa neighborhood, but again, Alum Rock adjacent. It was founded in 1976. It has the largest student population of any high school in San Jose. Last time I checked, it was over 3,000 students. And it also has an incredibly active theater ghost. So here's a photo of the outside of the theater.
Original building.
Okay. So it looks pretty modern and updated, and it has been updated recently, but George is still around. So the most popular story is that a janitor fell to his death from the catwalks above the stage, and it's said to be his ghost that causes activity in the theater. However, my source, Kelly Dodd, has been a dance instructor at the school since the late 1980s, I believe. And she claims that while there is a ghost, no one has ever died in the theater. But in 1999, it was Kelly who gave the name George to the ghost, which has stuck to this day. And activity occurs in all areas of the theater, including the offices, storage rooms, and hallways. They hear voices, footsteps, banging sounds. There's also a seat that flips down on its own, and I have a story about that. The ghost is most active when someone is alone in the theater, although Kelly said that it has been pretty quiet recently. And when I was there, unfortunately, I did not experience anything. But Kelly has had some personal experiences in her office. It overlooks the practice dance studio down the hall from the theater. She's found things on her desk rearranged when no student or anyone else has been up there. Her office mate once opened the door and felt a burst of cold air rushing past her as though someone was coming into the room, even though there was no one there. Students standing on the stage have seen shadow figures moving around in the control booth at the back of the theater. Students and staff have also heard noise coming from the catwalks above the theater, banging and hammering when no one was there. And during one rehearsal, little bits of hardware like screws and things were falling down from the catwalk as though someone had been walking along and kind of kicked things loose as they were going. And the catwalks have controlled access points. So once you're up there, there's no way to get down without somebody seeing you. And when Kelly has stationed people around the theater and then gone up and explored, there has been nobody there. So this one is my favorite story. So during rehearsal, another teacher brought his dog to the rehearsal, and the dog spent the whole night sitting in front of a certain seat. It was the seat that flips down on its own. And the seat was down, although no one was sitting in it. And the dog stared and growled and whined at the seat until, without warning, the seat flipped itself back up and the dog finally relaxed and wandered away. So Kelly witnessed that one as well, and she thought it was pretty compelling. This is also pretty creepy, but while renovating the theater, it was discovered that a real live person had been living in the walls of the theater. He entered through an access panel in the control room, and he came out at night when the theater was empty. And it's thought that he was actually inside the walls while students and staff were working in the theater during the day.
Okay, that's the scariest story.
Right. And I was going to say, this is like the takeaway from a lot of these ghost stories, that sometimes living people can be more frightening than the dead, right? That's, yeah, pretty freaky. So these are a couple of pictures from my all access tour of the theater. On the left, we have the control booth looking out over the stage, and the panel that the man snuck into was behind behind my back here. And then on the right-hand side is a view of the catwalks going up. Okay. And with that, before we take questions, I want to share my contact info with you one more time before we open it up. Feel free to contact me via email or Instagram if you have questions about the book, if you have questions about the stories. I'm also, I know I said this was like my last book, but I'm also collecting stories just in case I write another one. This was San Jose city limits, so I think my next one will be haunted, not San Jose. So Santa Clara, Campbell, Sunnyvale, Morgan Hill, anywhere that's, you know, in the area. So if you have any ghost stories that might meet those areas, I would love to hear them. And the book is available anywhere you buy books. And Darlene, thank you for posting the link, the Amazon link in the chat. It's available at Hicklebee's Recycle. Support your local bookstores.
Good gift for Christmas.
It sure is. Yes, or
Good
Halloween if
stocking
people
or
give Halloween
yeah.
gifts. I don't know. But
so somebody is saying, what about the house on Center Road in Hellier in Seven Trees? Oh yeah, that's
yes. The Hellier house, that's in there. I meant to grab a copy of my book. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I definitely wrote about that. What I think is so interesting about that story is that there's no, like a lot of these, there's no basis for any of the legends. There's absolutely no way to document any of this. And out of all the places I wrote about, that's the one that I don't believe is haunted. I think it makes a really scary story. You know, a family that died in the house, Buddhist monks. Did we lose me? I think I lost me.
Do you want to
so
go to gallery view?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what's happening here.
I think if you just stop.
Okay, there we go. I don't know what happened. But as I was saying, the stories about Hellier House are pretty creepy, but I think it's also just a house that somebody just lives in on kind of a busy intersection and maybe doesn't want to be bothered. So of course you can, you know, make your own assessment about that. Yeah.
Does anybody have any other input they want to give, particularly for our area? I cannot. Oh, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Yeah, because there we go.
Okay.
So does anybody have any? I mean, I know of a haunted house around here, but I'm not going to mention it right now. I think many of you. I know
you're not going to tell me. Is it a private home?
No, I'm working. I'll talk about it with you offline, unless somebody mentions it. But
I see. Okay.
Does anybody have any stories they want to share about Alum Rock or area or anywhere or any area in San Jose? No. So do you have any plans for a book signing? Susan asked.
I will at some point. I know my publicist through the publisher is trying to set up some signings at local bookstores. I'm hoping to get a slot at Barnes and Noble at some point. So I will certainly publicize those on my Instagram when they come up. Yes. And also, I just heard from the Winchester Mystery House today. They are doing for 2023, they're doing a monthly speaker series. And I have been invited to be one of the guest speakers at the Winchester House. So that's coming up, you know, in next year, but that'll be pretty exciting too.
So are there any stories about the indigenous community, Native Americans? This one's in Mount Hamilton in particular, but in general, are there in this area?
There probably are. I did not research that aspect in particular. I do talk a little bit just about some of the indigenous beliefs, especially about life after death. But that was not an area where I focused my research. So I think that's probably another book that somebody else needs to write, because I'm sure there are stories out there.
So as I suspected, a few people mentioned the haunted, they direct messaged me. The rectory at St. John Vianney Parish is well known to be haunted in this area.
Okay.
So there's quite a few stories from quite a few people, actually.
Okay. I did not come across that in my research.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a book, actually,
Okay.
on it. So I'll talk to you about it
Oh,
offline.
cool. Yeah.
But there is, I'm doing a lot of research. It's very interesting story, but sticking with the ghost part of it, they believe it's a female ghost, and the back bedroom of the house on the second floor. Now, it has been seen in other parts of the house. There is a built-on area of the house where the pastor lives now, which is a newer area. The ghost has never been seen there because it's not part of the original house. So it's predominantly mostly seen on the second story in the very back of the house, closest to the parking lot, if you guys are familiar with St. John Vianney's. And it's a female ghost, and she has done a lot of flirtatious things as well.
Interesting.
Heard a lot of stories. Yeah, there's a lot of stories. So the priests live there, and it's usually I call them baby priests, but the new priests, or the ones that aren't quite priests yet, they send them to St. John Vianney's, and that's normally the bedroom that they end up being. And so they're younger men, and she tends to flirt with them a lot. Or they have felt kisses on their cheeks. They pulled the sheets down on them. One time she appeared in the shower. That was one where there was an actual appearance that I know of. And somebody else was writing their sermon, and they kept throwing it in the garbage can. It kept popping back out. So there's a ton of stories over there. I'm actually not even gotten to the story part, the haunted stories part of it. I'm still doing the history part of it.
And I think that really highlights just how huge San Jose is, and sometimes how kind of insular the neighborhoods can be. Like I'm sure there are a lot of stories out there that are kind of well known within their area, just don't make it, across town. So I can't wait to learn
So
more about
if you
it.
guys have other questions, you could pop them in the chat. The Alum Rock one I had heard, and I'll put the link in let me see if I can find it. Did you hear about the Burnell twins?
Yes, I did read about them in my research. There was something fishy about them. Is that right?
Well, the Burnells are a Californio family, and Paul Burnell is actually the official historian of San Jose.
Right.
He's a judge, and that's part of their family, is the Burnell. And there's a picture of them on this link that I just sent you.
I think this is a great website. I think I came across some of this information as well.
Yeah. What's documented or not, I don't know.
Right. It's a good story,
like you're
though.
saying, there's a lot of stories, but
right.
It's hard. And because you have to document stuff when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
And just thinking of that, since haunted stories are hard to prove, how did you document it, or what did the publisher expect from you?
I don't think they expected a whole lot. I think because of the genre, they knew that a lot of this I would not be able to verify most of this. So I do have a pretty extensive bibliography in the book, but most of that is the historical research that I did. In some cases, I was able to find actual documentation of deaths or other events that occurred at places, and I worked those into the stories. And then also, if I had personal interviews with people, things like that, I did document those. But otherwise, if it was just kind of hearsay, I didn't really have to cite my sources there.
So, who is this? Jesus Ibanya, because I don't know if I set the chat incorrectly, because I'm getting all direct messages, but he mentioned San Jose Haunts podcast. Are you familiar with that?
San Jose, is that what it is?
San Jose.
Yeah. Yes, that's a fun one. That's they cover a lot of the same places that I wrote about in the book. So there's a lot of nice overlap there where they're sharing similar stories.
Jesus, can you share that link with me so I can share it? So he says it's 2 San Jose natives explore paranormal activity in San Jose and surrounding areas, and maybe a great source for future references.
Yeah.
I
I've
wasn't
actually,
familiar with it. I'd like to listen to it.
yeah, I've been in contact with one of the people who host it, so I'm hoping to appear as a guest at some point.
What is
If
your
you're listening.
favorite story that you discovered out of your book?
I think my favorite overall is probably Hicks Road, just because when we talk about the archetypes and the tropes, there are so many of them in that location. There's the woman in white, there's the vanishing hitchhiker, there's the, again, with the cults. But my favorite part to research was, I think, Notre Dame High School downtown. I actually
Yeah.
found a verified death of a nun, which is a very sad story, but I've never seen that connection in print before. You know, Notre Dame is said to be haunted by the ghost of a nun, and I actually found a death of a nun. I don't think they're connected necessarily, but I loved doing the research about that place.
You don't think it was an O'Connor though, perhaps?
The story is that a nun became pregnant and she hanged herself off the balcony of the former O'Connor home, which was on the campus. The actual death was a nun when the building was an orphanage. She was a nun at the orphanage. She was lighting the furnace in the basement, and there was an explosion that blew the iron door open and hit her in the head, and she passed away from her injuries. So this was after the O'Connors had donated their home, but
That's
yeah.
I went. There's a couple Notre Dame people on the I can see
Oh,
here,
okay.
and we all believe O'Connor Mansion was haunted. So
Yeah, well, yeah, just looking at pictures, I believe it too.
yeah, I mean that does not surprise me because it was
Yeah.
always something scary, and they didn't used to let us go to the top portion of the although we would sneak up there sometimes
Oh.
before they tore it down. But
Yeah.
we used to do the religion classes in there back in the day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Phalia asked about Chuck E. Cheese on Tully Road.
Yes.
And then I'm gonna read it. Go ahead with Chuck E. Cheese, and then there's some more.
Yeah, so I do write about Chuck E. Cheese. There's a couple of legends of children who passed away in the building. Two different stories. One was a girl, one is a boy. One of the reports is that if you are in the parking lot and you look up at the third floor window, you can see a girl's face looking back at you. That area is all used for storage now, and so nobody should be up there. And then, of course, the machines that turn on after hours, things that are moved around, voices when the building is empty. So one of the cool things, I don't know if I want to give too much away of my stories because I want you to read the book, but one of the cool things about that is that there's a theory that actually is what's called a tulpa, or like a thought form, that there were no deaths actually reported on the property, but that so many people throughout the years have told this story that they've actually created the spirit just by repeating and believing in the ghost. They have actually kind of made it real.
What's that called?
It's called a tulpa, Tulpa. It's from, I believe, a Buddhist word. It's just one of the theories out there in the paranormal community. But I think that idea of actually manifesting something is just so interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other one, and this is not in San Jose, so you may not know about it. I'm gonna share the Tulpa thing with everybody too. Is the Mercado Theater in Santa Clara.
I have heard stories about that. I'm not quite sure what they are, and of course, I didn't write about it. Yeah, but if anybody has any more information on what is said to happen there, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
So is it mostly female ghost or male ghost?
I feel like I probably wrote about a split, probably even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is
I
there
think
is there any children ghosts around here? Ghosts that are children?
Chuck E. Cheese. I'm trying to think. I think there are others. Off the top of my head, I can't remember right now. Oh, sorry. There's a bunch of schools that I wrote about in the book. For some reason, there's maybe like 10 elementary schools in San Jose that are haunted. And oftentimes those are said to be children.
So somebody said about Danny was saying about the guy who died chopping wood on the Chuck E. Cheese property. Maybe he's a spirit.
So that's the Toys R Us in Sunnyvale. And
That's Toys R Us. Okay.
what's interesting about that story is that that came from Sylvia Brown, the famous local psychic. She did, I guess in the 70s or 80s, she did a special where she went and did a reading there. She was later, I know a lot of people don't want to hear this because a lot of people really liked her, but she was later kind of debunked as kind of a fraud. And there's actually no evidence, there's no verification that this farmhand named Yanni Janssen actually existed. And the woman he was said to be in love with, there is, documentation about her, but she was like 30 years older than he was. So again, that's a really compelling story, but I don't think there's any basis in truth for that one. Unfortunately.
So, and then somebody else asked about Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, which is not part of your book.
No, maybe the next book, but yeah. I think there is stuff that goes on there, whether it's that farmhand or not. I don't think it's him, but there have been enough reports throughout the years that something is happening there.
So what are the new ghosts though? Because it always seems like there's old ghosts. Is there any new ghosts hanging out? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like high-tech ghosts?
I don't know. My husband works for a high-tech company and it's a pretty scary place sometimes. Yeah. Steal your souls.
But I mean, because it's interesting because there's all these ghosts and they're always like from a long time ago. But is there, ghosts that died recently?
The most recent one I can think of is from a school. I can't remember.
Somebody mentioned Overfelt.
Overfelt has the janitor, and then Silver Creek, the high school, there was somebody who died in a pool recently. That was fairly recent, in the last maybe 10 years. And then there was another elementary school where a boy was actually stabbed, and this was, I think, in 2005 or something, 2007. And so his ghost is said to be sighted kind of in the whole area. So those are the most recent ones I can think of. As far as high-tech campuses, not yet, but maybe in 20 or 30 years, maybe they will be.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in doing the whole ghost thing in the first place?
I've always loved spooky stories. And I was actually talking with my mom about this this morning, because every interview that I've done, they seem to kind of target my mom. I just mentioned her briefly in my introduction, but everybody thinks it's cool that my mom introduced me to this. But she always told us scary stories. And my mom always really loved classic literature like Poe and Bram Stoker, Dracula. So that the literature was really always part of my life. Yeah, and I don't know what it is. There's just something about scary stuff that appeals to my personality.
So Cecilia wanted to know if there's any ghosts at James Lick High School. Does anybody know of any ghosts that's on the call at James Lick?
Yeah, I didn't write about James Lick in my book, but I would not be surprised actually if there were stories about it.
I haven't heard anything about James Lick at all. I was curious about your certification though.
So the Ryan Institute is they're based out of, I think, North Carolina, and they've been doing paranormal and like ESP research for like decades and decades. I think they started in the 50s. And so now they have some online programs where you can take coursework in things like paranormal investigations and fieldwork and ESP. And as a high school teacher who's credentialed, I have to say this is a non-accredited institution. But I'm really interested in just learning. I love to learn. And so I've taken some courses, and that's been enough to get me certified. So I've got a certificate with my name on it. So
what do your students think about all this? What grade do you teach?
I teach juniors this year.
What do your students think about all your paranormal activity?
They think I may be a little bit kooky, but fun. And they've been really supportive. They really like hearing about the book. And I was featured in the Mercury News this morning. So I brought the paper in and I held it up. And yeah, I'm in there. They applauded for me. And so they're really nice kids, really, really nice and really supportive. So yeah, it's been fun to talk with them about it.
Was it in
It was, yeah, Sal Pizarro's
yeah.
column. Yep, yep. I'm on the front page of the local section. It's a nice big picture of me.
Okay, I'll put the link in
Oh,
here
thank you.
for people that can get past the paywall.
Yeah, right.
I know. Oh yeah, you got a nice write-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
good write-up.
that
That's
was fun.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect story for right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap it up unless anybody else has any more questions. Let's see. A couple of times we'll say, oh, so they're saying, so Danny's saying a couple of times we'll set it up. Danny, can you just unmute yourself and tell us the story? Danny, where are you? So Danny's saying, did you unmute yourself? Danny, I want you to just say what you're saying here. So he's saying a couple of times while setting up for wrestling tournaments at Lick.
Okay, so, can you hear me now? Thanks to
hear
my
you.
grandson. So we used to have the Lynn Dyke tournament. Lynn Dyke was a wrestling coach at James Lick, and we named, actually, Ray Jimenez named the tournament after Lynn Dyke for all he did for the wrestling community out here. A couple times setting up in the gym and in the multi-purpose room, we had to go looking for noises that were there. So of course, we never found anything, and there's nobody else on campus late at night. We're setting up for the wrestling tournament Saturday morning. So we did run across some spooky, questionable noises.
Do you think it could have been a rat?
You know, I do not. They were too loud and too distinct. You know, I mean, the gym is wide open, right? I mean, you're in there laying down mats. The kids have gone home. You're setting up the brackets, and you know, just over the corner towards the pool, there's a noise, and the doors are locked. So Nick had a couple noises.
Well, if you find out more information, you'll have to email her.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Jerry. Jerry had something you wanted to say about Grant Ranch.
Yeah. Oh wait, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So a couple Halloweens ago, I forget, it was like maybe 5 or 6. They used to do these spooky Halloween tours over there, and it was by the park. It was with the park rangers up in Grant Ranch. And as we know, former President Grant made his money in the gold rush era by running grocery stores. So it's a historic site. And then we went into the house, and a couple of times throughout the tour, I just felt like a presence and like spider webs on me, even though there was no spider webs, and you could hear chains. I did not believe in ghosts until I did that tour, and it made me a believer. And other people have told me like similar accounts of that mansion. But it's just, it's like a hidden gem up in the mountains.
So what house is that?
It's Grant Ranch. Are you familiar with Mount Hamilton Observatory?
Yes.
So on the way up, you have to pass the county park, Grant Ranch. It's still within San Jose, and it's within the San Jose like boundaries. But it's like out in the middle of a field and in the woods, kind of thing. And there's this huge white mansion, and the parks department owned that mansion, and they used to do like these haunted tours, like I was saying. So yeah, it's really haunted. And you can ask any park ranger there, and they'll tell you stories.
I've heard about that. Yeah, I've heard some of the stories, and I think there was a reason I didn't include it in the book. I think maybe I learned about it too late to include it or something. But yeah, that's definitely got some good stories. And also that spider web feeling, I've experienced that same thing myself. It's one of the few experiences I've had. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah.
What are some of the things you look that are signs that there's a ghost?
I think it really varies from location to location. And one of the theories also is that people just experience ghosts differently. So the theory is that ghosts are not like physical apparitions. They're in our consciousness. And so I might walk into a room and smell flowers, and you could walk into the same room at the same time, and maybe you would see something. So I think it's really kind of individual to the haunting and also to the person who's experiencing it.
Yeah, I experienced ghosts one time, but I wasn't here in Alum Rock, so.
Maybe you'll have another experience.
I was visiting my one of my friends in Madrid, Spain, actually, and I went to her apartment. It was a new apartment that she had moved to. I hadn't been there before, and she wasn't there, so they just left the keys. And I went into this room, went to sleep. I talked to this person, and there was this dog there. And then later on, I took a nap because I had come back from my long flight. And then she called me on the phone. She goes, "Yeah, my cousins." And I thought it was her cousins I was talking to. Turns out they were ghosts. and then I go, and I didn't say anything to her because, they had those 3-day weddings, right? And then later, like 4 days later, I told her, I said, "You know what? Tienes fantasmos." And so, I said, "You have a ghost in your front room." And then she's all, "Ay, no me digas." She goes, "Don't tell me that. Don't tell me that." Because she said her brother-in-law, as soon as he walked into that one room, he said, "There's a ghost in this room." And I had never even been there, never heard her story, nothing.
Yeah.
And then I said the same thing. And I talked to this, I found out now it was a ghost, and there was a dog ghost too.
Wow. That's really
Crazy.
interactive. That's a really unique experience. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they didn't bother me. I thought it was her cousins. I didn't know. There was another creepy person that came in too, though, that didn't talk to me. Or anyways, it was interesting. But yeah, they didn't exist. I found out later. They were not her cousins. Anyways, yeah, but it was interesting. So we are going to wrap it up at 7:01. So thank you guys all for coming. And then you got the links, and I'll put the link in the event page too, so that you guys can pick up her book. Good little stocking stuffers, good for Halloween. And thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for participating and sharing and watching. And follow me on Instagram so you can get updates on the book and on signings and things like that. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye. Bye.